Is history repeating itself in College Station? Welcome to Overtime with Matt Moscona. I am your host, Matt Moscona. Texas A&M and Mike Elko recently landed a commitment from Caden Henderson. If you're not familiar, if you don't follow recruiting, that's okay. Caden Henderson is a 6', 225-pound linebacker out of Jesuit High School in Tampa, Florida. He is a five-star, and he is the number one linebacker in America. That, in and of itself, is a prospect that anyone would love to have as a part of their recruiting class, Texas A&M or quite literally any other program. But this does illustrate an interesting trend in College Station because you see, Henderson, when he committed, became the fifth five-star commitment in the 2027 class for the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, in a bygone era of recruiting, if you had five stars in one class, it would be considered one of the greatest recruiting classes of all time. Fan bases notably would be doing backflips over that kind of recruiting haul. But this might signal misplaced priorities and resources for Texas A&M. Let me explain, because I'm going to illustrate two polar opposite ways that major programs in the SEC are going about building their rosters in this NIL portal era. But first, a little more on this Texas A&M class. We mentioned Caden Henderson. Well, Mark Matthews is a part of this class. He's a five-star, the number 5 prospect in the country, the number 1 offensive tackle. He's out of Fort Lauderdale. Kamari Dorsey is a safety, the number 10 prospect in the country, the number 1 safety in America. Zyron Forstall, who's from New Orleans, went to Jesuit High in New Orleans. Now he's at IMG. He's an edge rusher. He's the number 24 prospect in America, a 5-star. Kennedy Brown from Houston, a 5-star, the number 25 prospect in America. He's an interior offensive lineman. We mentioned Caden Henderson. That's the 5 stars. And after that, Raylan Henry is a cornerback, number 42 nationally. Jaquan Snell is a safety, number 48 nationally. Jaden Upshaw is a wide receiver, number 56 nationally. 3 spots behind him is Miles Smith, a defensive lineman, 59 nationally. And 2 spots after him is Frederick Ards III, an edge rusher out of Orlando, Florida, number 61 nationally. So Texas A&M has 10 commitments in the top 61. 5 of them are 5 stars. And if you were guaranteed that all of those prospects were going to stay for 3 or 4 years, that would be incredible. But I can't help but think of what happened at Texas A&M just 4 years ago. Remember the 2022 recruiting class that Jimbo Fisher signed? And it was statistically the highest rated recruiting class ever. They had 30 signees, and 8 of the 30 were 5 stars. 8 5 stars. 22 were top 24/7 prospects. So the entire class was filled with blue chippers, including 8 5 stars. Well, you remember what happened. They all left. And we're talking about guys like Walter Nolan, and who transferred to Ole Miss, and Evan Stewart, who went to Oregon. And you can go up and down that, Shamar Stewart, who did finish his career at A&M, but you go up and down that list of elite level prospects and realize, man, most of those guys in that 2022 class didn't stay and never materialized. So Texas A&M made a large financial investment in that 2022 signing class to not get a return because you paid to get them and they all left. Well, it kind of feels like Texas A&M might be repeating that same mistake. Now, let me issue a contrast with how Lane Kiffin is building his roster. And to do that, I'm actually going to go back to that 2022 class. Because in 2022, Lane Kiffin was at Ole Miss, and Brian Kelly had just been hired at LSU. And those two men, Kiffin and Kelly, took very opposite approaches to building a roster. Brian Kelly was fond of saying he wanted to build, recruit and develop through the high school ranks and supplement via the portal. Lane Kiffin, meanwhile, became known as the Portal King. He was the self-appointed Portal King, but my goodness, did it bear out. He didn't recruit as heavily at the high school ranks. They went heavily in the transfer portal, and it paid off. Over the last 5 seasons, Ole Miss won 50 games. The only 2 SEC programs over that span that won more games were Georgia and Alabama. So Lane Kiffin clearly had a path and a strategy in this era to build and utilize the portal more so than the high school rankings. Well, that is compounded even more now because we see in this era how often and how difficult it is to get guys to stay. As a matter of fact, one of the things that Lane Kiffin has said pretty notably is that they have changed the way that they recruit high school prospects because they don't have to stay. Effectively, and I'm going to oversimplify this, the approach Lane Kiffin is taking now at LSU is they are either going to pay elite level prospects that are plug and play immediate impact guys, or they're looking at guys that are going to come for little to no money and that they think are high character guys that will stay and grow and develop, that they think have a high ceiling. You'll take that 3-star prospect that you think is raw, but you see the ability and you think after 2-3 years of development in a college weight training program and getting coached, that you'll be able to maximize the physical ability. So, and if they leave, you haven't lost anything because you didn't invest anything financially. So this maybe is the question where when you look at this Texas A&M class, you have to wonder, okay, 5 stars, 10 players in the top 61 nationally, all of those prospects cost money. None of those prospects are going to make a college decision without being paid handsomely because that's what the market bears right now for those elite level prospects. So if you're Texas A&M, you look at it from this standpoint. If you get those all 10 of those elite prospects on campus, fantastic. But do you really want 10 true freshmen playing key roles on your team? Now, I'll tell you candidly, I don't know 1 to 85 what Texas A&M's roster is going to look like in 2026, let alone 2027 when all those guys are going to show up. Okay, supposedly will show up. We'll see. There's transfers and then there's guys going to the draft, and so there's going to be a ton of roster turnover everywhere because building rosters in college football today is a year-to-year proposition. So I don't know what that 2027 roster is going to look like. But if Texas A&M is in a spot where they have to play 10 true freshmen in key roles, that's generally not a recipe for success. The contrast is look at the way Curt Cignetti just built his national championship team at Indiana. He didn't go recruit a bunch of elite blue chip high school players. They went in the transfer portal, a lot of whom came from James Madison with Cignetti when he took the job. And then they went elsewhere. Fernando Mendoza was a fifth-year player who was at Cal, played 1 season at Indiana, but he was the right guy in the right system at the right time, a veteran player who was plug and play, won the Heisman as the first overall pick, and Indiana won the national championship. So that's the approach that Indiana took. I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but it is a contrast to what Texas A&M looks like they're doing. It's not to say A&M won't go in the portal. It's just to say they are making a large financial investment in the high school ranks, which either one of two things is likely. Either you're going to play a whole bunch of young guys, which means you're going to be a really young team, and that doesn't usually beget success. Or two, a lot of those guys will show up on campus, sit, not play, and then maybe transfer, and then you've committed that money for 2027 into players that aren't going to contribute. The way Kiffin has said it is, if you have a cap, right? Like think about your salary cap or your whatever amount of money, whatever budget you have to spend on your roster. He's not going to spend money on players that aren't going to contribute. So if they're going to spend money on a high school player, like Lane Kiffin's first signing class, 5-star Lamar Brown was the #1 player in the country. He's from Baton Rouge, but he's an edge rusher who is expected to be a plug-and-play immediate rotation guy. They went in the portal and added Prince Willie Monmielen from Ole Miss, Jordan Ross from Tennessee. But after that, Lamar Brown could be the next guy. You got some other guys who are hanging around, but Richard Anderson, 5-star interior defensive tackle. He was taking reps with the ones in spring. He is expected to be an immediate impact guy. When you look at Joshua Dobson, a 5-star #1 corner for 2027, all throughout his process, LSU was thought to be the leader for Joshua Dobson. Dobson said as much. And then when Dobson listed his final 5, LSU wasn't even on the list because it was going to take a large financial investment to get Dobson on campus in 2027. And he isn't going to play because DJ Pickett will be back in 2027. PJ Woodland could be back in 2027. Aiden Anding, Haven Finney, you can go down the list. So Dobson might be your 3rd at best cornerback, but you're not going to pay top dollar for your number 3 corner. So if Dobson can go get more money somewhere else and play as a freshman, good for him. That's the approach that Lane Kiffin is taking. And it's pretty clear Mike Elko and Texas A&M are taking a different approach. Now, bears mentioning, Texas A&M is a very wealthy school with tons of billionaire donors. And maybe they can afford to just set that money on fire. And if a 5-star prospect comes and it costs a lot of money to get him in there in 2027, he leaves after a year and doesn't play, well, you set a match to that stack of cash, but maybe you don't care if you have those resources to burn. Maybe it's different for schools that are operating on a different budget. It's not to say LSU hasn't spent. They've spent more than $40 million on their 2026 roster, but look at where their biggest investments are. Sam Leavitt, their starting quarterback. Jordan Seaton, reportedly $4 million, left tackle. Prince Wilumon-Mielen, elite edge rusher, led Ole Miss in sacks and TFLs going into his senior year, already a proven SEC prospect on a 7-figure deal. Trades Green, retaining Trades Green on a 7-figure deal. You're bringing back Harlem Berry, a 5-star rusher. These are guys that you're anticipating your retention of key players and bringing in key guys out of the portal are the big, quote unquote, big ticket items. But they're guys you know are premium positions and proven great players at premium positions. Texas A&M is taking a different approach. I want to be clear. I'm not saying it's the wrong approach. It didn't work when they did this in 2022. They made a massive financial investment in a high school class, and after a year or two, all of those guys left, and you never got the productivity out of them. So maybe this is going to prove to be the way forward for Mike Elko, Texas A&M, and perhaps it works because maybe they have a system or contracts built out to where those guys do stay and grow and develop. Or maybe after a year, half that class ends up leaving and you didn't get anything out of them and you wasted the financial investment you made in this class. It'll be fascinating to see. And by the way, I don't think Texas A&M's done. 5-star interior offensive lineman Albert Simeon out of Southwest Louisiana. All the recruiting services have Simeon as a Texas A&M lean. And I think from LSU's perspective, they look at Simeon and they go, we're not going to play a true freshman on the interior of the offensive line. So if he wants to go to A&M, great. Maybe they play a freshman or maybe he sits and then hits the portal and you get him when he transfers in a year or two. But it's polar opposite approaches. And just like Kelly and Kiffin took very different approaches, it appears Elko is taking a very dramatically different approach in the portal era, investing so heavily in the high school ranks. Will those guys be able to contribute immediately, or is Texas A&M setting a match to a big pile of cash? Only time will tell. But we'll be talking about it here on Overtime with Matt Moscona. So if you're finding the channel for the first time, please subscribe. Please smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And if you're on podcast, thanks so much for being there as well. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Until next time, it's Overtime with Matt Moscona.